A poor girl let a cowboy and his son stay. She had no idea he was a millionaire. Jackson Carter had always been a man of few words. The wide, dusty plains of this frontier planet had been his home for many years. He knew the land, its dangers, and its beauty like the back of his hand. Yet no matter how hard he worked or how far he rode, there was one thing he had never been able to escape: his past. A year ago, Jackson's father had passed away, leaving behind a small plot of land and a promise to a neighboring family. Alyssa Winters, a young woman who was yet to meet her betrothed. The promise had been made years ago when the two families had united their efforts to build their ranches. Now it was Jackson's turn to fulfill the agreement. He hadn't thought much about it until the letter came, carried by a dusty rider on horseback. The letter said, "Your father's wish was that you marry Alyssa Winters to carry on the legacy of both families. We await your return." Jackson had been reluctant at first. He wasn't the marrying type. He preferred the quiet of the open plains, the freedom of being alone, and the solitude that kept his painful memories at bay. But the land was his responsibility now, and it was clear that the Winters family expected him to fulfill the promise. As Jackson made his way back to the village, a mix of emotions stirred within him. There was an unease about returning, a feeling that he wasn't ready for this life. But the promise had been made, and now it was his turn to keep it. He wasn't sure what to expect from the woman he had only heard about in passing, a woman who had grown up knowing her future was set, but had never truly met the man she was promised to. Alyssa Winters had heard stories about her future husband for years. As a child, she had imagined what he would look like, what kind of man he would be. Her family spoke of him as a strong, capable cowboy, someone who could provide, someone who would be there for her. But she had never met him, never spoken to him. And now, with the days leading up to their marriage, she felt a mix of excitement and dread. Alyssa had spent her days learning the ways of the land, taking care of her father's ranch. But the truth was, she was uncertain about what was to come. Would Jackson be the man of her dreams, the one who would protect her, cherish her? Or was she simply a piece in the puzzle of their family's plans? The day Jackson arrived, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the ranch. He stepped off his horse, his boots sinking into the dirt as he walked toward the house. He had changed little since the last time he had seen it, years ago, when he was just a boy. His face was rugged, his jaw strong and set, eyes shaded with memories he kept to himself. Alyssa stood in the doorway, her heart racing. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was real, she felt unsure of what to say. Jackson's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was only silence between them. "You must be Alyssa," Jackson said quietly. His voice was deep, rough, from years of use. He tipped his hat in greeting. Alyssa nodded, feeling a nervous flutter in her chest. "And you must be Jackson," she replied, her voice soft but steady. They stood there for a long moment, both unsure of what to say next. Finally, Jackson broke the silence. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, his voice low. "But I'm here to fulfill my father's promise. I'll work hard to make this right." Alyssa nodded again, her heart heavy. She knew this was her duty, but a part of her wanted more than just duty. She wanted love, understanding, someone who could see her for who she truly was, not just as a piece of land to be claimed. "I understand," she said, forcing a smile. "We'll make it work." That night, as the stars filled the sky, Jackson and Alyssa sat together at the dinner table, the air between them thick with uncertainty. Jackson ate in silence, while Alyssa tried her best to make conversation, though it was difficult. Every word felt awkward, every glance too long. As the evening wore on, the tension between them remained, neither of them knowing how to bridge the gap. Alyssa found herself wondering about Jackson's past, about the life he had lived before coming back to the ranch. Was he a man of kindness, or was he someone who would always keep his heart locked away? Jackson, for his part, kept his thoughts to himself. He had lived a solitary life for so long that it felt strange to sit at a table with someone else. He had known the cold loneliness of the plains, the quiet nights spent with only his thoughts, but now he had to share his life with a woman he barely knew. A woman who had been promised to him, a woman he was supposed to marry. After dinner, Jackson excused himself to the porch, needing a breath of fresh air. Alyssa followed him, the cool evening breeze ruffling her hair. "Jackson, I don't want to make this harder than it already is," Alyssa said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I've always known that I would marry someone I didn't know, and I want to believe in this. In us." Jackson turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We'll get there," he said quietly. It's just going to take time, but I promise you I'll do everything I can to make sure we're all right. Alyssa gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I believe you, Jackson. I just hope we can find something real. Jackson's gaze softened, and for a moment it seemed like he was about to say something more, but the words never came. Instead, they stood there, together but apart, both uncertain of the future but bound by the promise made long ago. Jackson Carter had always been a man of few words. He preferred the silence of the open plains, the sound of wind against his hat, and the rhythm of his horse's hooves beneath him. There was a quiet strength in the way he worked, a steady hand on the reins and a watchful eye over the land he called home. But as he returned to his family's ranch after years of living alone on the frontier, a sense of unease settled over him. It wasn't the land he was worried about. It was the promise his father had made, a promise to marry a woman he had never met, Alyssa Winters. The arrangement had been made when both families were struggling to build their ranches, and the union would bring stability and land to both sides, but Jackson had spent years running from the weight of that promise. Now, his father's death had brought him back home, and it was time to fulfill that promise. The letter had come only a week ago, delivered by a young rider who had hardly stopped to rest. It was short, simple, but filled with expectation. Your father's wishes were clear. Return to the Winters Ranch. We await your return to fulfill the promise. Jackson couldn't ignore it. The land needed him, and his family's name depended on it. But even as he rode back to the Winters Ranch, the familiar feeling of uncertainty gripped his chest. What would Alyssa be like? What would it be like to share his life with someone he'd never met? Alyssa Winters had known this day would come. She had been raised hearing stories of her future husband, Jackson Carter, the cowboy who roamed the plains and lived a life of independence. Her family had always spoken of him as a man of great strength and resilience. But what would he be like in person? Would he be the quiet, solitary man she imagined, or would he be someone different altogether? As a child, she had dreamed of meeting him, of knowing what it would be like to be his wife. But now that the time had come, Alyssa felt nervous. This wasn't a choice she had made. It was a duty, a responsibility passed down through generations, and she wondered, as she waited on the porch of her family's ranch, what her future would hold with a man she had never known. The sun was beginning to set as Jackson rode into the Winters Ranch, the orange glow of the horizon casting long shadows across the dusty ground. His boots hit the dirt with a soft thud as he dismounted, leading his horse to the stable. His face was rough, hardened by years of living alone, but his eyes were soft, filled with thoughts of a future he hadn't planned. Alyssa stood on the porch, her heart racing as she saw him approach. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but now that it was real, she didn't know what to say or how to act. The man who would be her husband was finally here, and she was uncertain of how to begin. Jackson looked up, meeting her gaze. His dark eyes took in the sight of her, a woman whose name he had heard for years, but whose face he had never seen. She was beautiful, with soft features and a quiet strength in the way she stood, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The same uncertainty he felt. "You must be Alyssa," Jackson said, his voice deep and steady, though there was a hint of hesitation. Alyssa nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. "And you must be Jackson," she replied softly. There was a long pause between them. Both of them were unsure of how to move forward, both of them caught in the weight of what was expected of them. But finally, Alyssa stepped forward, offering a small smile. "I've heard so much about you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was beating faster. "I didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad you're here." Jackson returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not what either of us expected," he said quietly, "but we'll make it work. That's what families do." Alyssa nodded, though she wasn't sure if making it work would be enough. Could she learn to love a man she had never chosen for herself? Could Jackson ever see her as more than a duty, more than a promise made by their fathers? That night they sat at the dinner table, the silence between them thick and heavy. Jackson ate his meal slowly, glancing up at Alyssa from time to time, but neither of them seemed to know what to say. Alyssa tried to make conversation, but each question felt awkward. Each answer seemed too short. She couldn't help but wonder what Jackson was thinking. Was he as uncertain as she was? Or had he already accepted this new life, ready to fulfill his father's promise without hesitation? As the meal ended, Jackson excused himself and stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air brushed against his face, bringing with it a sense of calm. He looked up at the stars, remembering a time when he was alone on the plains, far from any commitments or promises. Life had been simpler then. But now, he was bound by something larger than himself. He had a future to build with a woman he barely knew. Alyssa followed him outside, standing in the doorway as she watched him. She had never seen him like this before, quiet, thoughtful, his gaze far away. The uncertainty she had felt earlier returned, stronger now. What did Jackson think of her? Was she simply a woman to be claimed, or was there something more to their marriage? Jackson? Alyssa's voice was soft, hesitant. He turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the dim light. Yes? I don't want to make this harder than it already is, Alyssa said, her voice trembling slightly. But I've always known that I would marry someone I didn't know, and I want to believe in this, in us. Jackson looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed like he might say something more, but the words didn't come. Instead, he nodded slowly. We'll figure it out, he said quietly. It'll take time, but we'll make it work. Alyssa wasn't sure if she believed him, but she wanted to. She wanted to believe that they could find something real in this marriage, something beyond the promise made by their fathers. As the night deepened, Jackson and Alyssa stood there, side by side but still distant, both uncertain of what the future held, both bound by a promise neither of them had chosen, but both determined to find a way forward. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet tension that had filled the house slowly began to fade. Jackson and Alyssa settled into a routine, working together on the land, each of them trying to do their part. The house was small, but it had been built with care. It was theirs now, and they would make it a home, even if they didn't yet know what it would take to truly be together. Alyssa had always dreamed of being a rancher, of working the land just like her father had. But she had also dreamed of a love that would sweep her off her feet, a love built on understanding and trust. She had hoped that somehow this marriage would turn into something like that. But each day with Jackson felt like a new challenge. He was kind, but distant. He worked hard, but rarely spoke. Alyssa could see the walls he had built around himself. She didn't know what had caused him to shut himself off from the world, but she wanted to be the one to break through. One evening, as the sun began to set and the day's work was done, Alyssa found herself sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn pink and purple. She had been thinking about Jackson all day. They had spent hours fixing the fence, but the silence between them felt like a barrier they couldn't cross. She wanted to know more about him, wanted to understand what made him tick. But every time she tried to ask, he shut her down with a quiet answer or a change of subject. But tonight was different. Tonight there was a calmness in the air, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could start to change. Alyssa looked out at the horizon, her mind racing with thoughts of her future. Jackson came out to join her, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. He stood next to her for a long moment, looking out at the same sunset. Neither of them said anything at first. The silence between them was different now, less awkward, more comfortable. You ever think about the future, Alyssa? Jackson asked, his voice low but with an edge of curiosity in it. Alyssa turned to him, surprised by the question. She had expected him to stay quiet, as he always did. Of course, she replied softly. Every day, I think about what we're building here. I think about what's next. Jackson nodded, his eyes still fixed on the sunset. Yeah, me too, he said, his tone distant. I don't know if I ever imagined it would be like this, though. Alyssa didn't know what to say to that. She had imagined this day her whole life. The day when she would marry a man who would be her partner, her equal. But now that the day had come, it felt like they were both still strangers to each other, walking around in circles. I don't know what's going on between us, Jackson, Alyssa admitted. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. But I want to try. I want to be here, with you. I want to build something real. Jackson looked at her then, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he didn't say anything. Alyssa felt the weight of his silence, unsure of what he was thinking. You're right, Jackson said finally, his voice quieter now. We're both trying. It's just hard, you know? Alyssa nodded, understanding more than he realized. I know. It's hard for me too. But we don't have to do this alone. We can figure it out together. For the first time since they'd met, Jackson's gaze softened. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted between them. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough. Enough for Alyssa to feel like maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Later that night, after a simple dinner, Jackson and Alyssa sat on the porch together, sharing the quiet. It wasn't much, but it was something. The night air was cool, and the stars above them shone brightly in the clear sky. Jackson broke the silence. I never really thought about what I wanted in a marriage, he said, quietly. I always just did what I had to do, but now, with you, I think I might want something more. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what Jackson meant, but it felt like a step forward, a step towards something better. "What do you want, Jackson?" she asked gently, her voice full of hope. He looked at her, his eyes dark in the moonlight. "I want to find peace. I want to be able to wake up in the morning and know that the person beside me wants to be there. I want to feel like I'm building something that matters." Alyssa smiled softly, a warmth spreading through her chest. "We're already building something," she said. "We're building our future, together. It might take time, but I think we can make it work. We just have to be patient." Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. For the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe he could start to believe in this, believe in the promise that had brought them together. The next few days passed slowly, but with each one, Alyssa and Jackson grew a little closer. They worked together on the ranch, side by side, learning to trust each other with more than just the work. They began to share more about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Jackson talked about the hard years he had spent alone, the pain of losing his father, the loneliness that had followed him for so long. Alyssa, in turn, spoke of her hopes for the future, the longing she had always felt for a love that would be real and lasting. It was in these quiet moments that they began to understand each other more, not just as husband and wife, but as two people who were trying to find their place in a world that had always been uncertain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jackson stood behind Alyssa as she worked on a new fence. He watched her for a moment, admiring the way she moved with confidence and grace, her focus steady as she worked. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and helped her with the last post. "You're a hard worker," he said, his voice full of respect. Alyssa smiled at him, her heart light. "So are you." For the first time, Jackson felt a sense of contentment, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he had found the place he had been searching for all along. End of Part 3. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Jackson woke, the warmth of the light spilling through the small window of their home. He stretched his arms and looked over at Alyssa, still asleep beside him. It had been months since their wedding, and every day with her had been a mixture of challenges and small victories. Though they had been married for some time now, Jackson still didn't feel like they were fully there. They were still learning, still figuring out what this new life meant for both of them. But something had changed in him. In the past few weeks, as they had worked together on the land and spent quiet evenings side by side, Jackson had started to feel a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. It was a feeling he hadn't known for a long time. And Alyssa, despite her initial fears, had grown into a role beside him. The awkwardness had faded, replaced by something deeper: trust, respect, and yes, even love. Today felt different. There was a calm in the air, a quiet certainty that this would be a day for something new. As Alyssa woke, her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled softly when she saw Jackson already up. She hadn't heard him leave the bed, but his presence was always felt. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke louder than anything he could say. Slowly, she stretched, her muscles sore from the work they'd done the day before. They had spent the past week fixing fences, mending the ranch after the last storm had passed through. Their lives weren't easy, but every moment spent together made it feel a little more right. "Morning, Jackson," said his voice rough but warm. Alyssa smiled back. "Good morning." They both stood and started to get dressed, moving in unspoken rhythm. Jackson went to the stove to start a pot of coffee, while Alyssa began to prepare breakfast. They didn't need to speak much anymore. Things were becoming second nature between them. There was a quiet understanding that filled the space, and for the first time Alyssa didn't feel the heavy weight of uncertainty. They sat at the small kitchen table, the sun shining through the window and casting a soft glow over everything. Alyssa reached for her coffee and took a small sip. Jackson watched her, the faintest of smiles playing on his lips. "I was thinking about the future," Alyssa said, breaking the silence. "About what we've built here and what's still to come." Jackson raised an eyebrow, a slight surprise flickering in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to bring up the future so openly. But there was something different about Alyssa now. She had always been strong, but in the last few months, she had become more than just the woman who had been promised to him. She had become his equal, his partner, and in many ways, his best friend. "Yeah?" Jackson asked, his voice quiet but curious. "What are you thinking?" "I think we've made something good here," she said slowly, her eyes meeting his. "It's not perfect, but it's ours, and I want to keep building on it. I want to keep building this life with you." Jackson looked down at his hands, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug. There was so much he had wanted to say to her, so much he had kept inside, but the words never seemed enough. He didn't have the right words to express what he was feeling. All he could do was show her through his actions, through the way he worked beside her every day and protected her with every breath. "You're right," he finally said, his voice steady. "We've built something together, and I want to keep building too." That was all he needed to say. Alyssa smiled, and the warmth between them felt like the sun rising higher in the sky. For the first time since they had gotten married, she felt truly seen by him. Not as a promise made, but as a person he genuinely wanted to share his life with. Later that morning, they decided to take a break from the work on the ranch and head into town. Jackson had been planning it for days, but it wasn't just about the errands they needed to run. He wanted to take Alyssa somewhere special, somewhere where they could be more than just a couple working the land. He wanted to show her that they were more than the sum of their obligations, that they were a team, and he was proud of the life they were creating together. The small town wasn't far, but it felt like a world away. When they arrived, the town seemed almost peaceful. People were going about their business, nodding and greeting as Jackson and Alyssa walked down the main street. It felt good to be out of the house, away from the constant work. It felt like a moment of calm, a chance to breathe. They stopped at the general store to pick up supplies. As they walked through the aisles, their fingers brushed against each other. It was a small, simple touch, but it felt significant. Jackson looked at her, his eyes soft. "Anything you need?" he asked. Alyssa shook her head. "I've got everything I need right here." It was a simple answer, but it was more than that. It was a statement of everything they had built, everything they had become. They weren't perfect, but they were together, and that was enough. As they left the store, Jackson led her to a small bench by the side of the road. They sat together in silence, watching the world go by. The sun was high in the sky now, and the world seemed to be holding its breath. For the first time, they were able to sit side by side without the pressure of expectations or obligations. It was just them, together. Jackson reached over and took her hand, his grip steady and strong. Alyssa squeezed his hand in return, a smile on her face. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but it was enough. It was everything they needed in that moment. "Jackson," Alyssa said softly, her voice filled with sincerity, "I'm glad I'm here with you. I'm glad I'm with you in this life." Jackson turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth and something else, something deeper than words could express. "I'm glad you're here too, Alyssa. I never thought I'd find someone like you." And in that moment, Alyssa knew. They had come a long way since the beginning. The promise that had started everything was no longer just about duty. It was about the life they had created together, the love they were building, and the future they would continue to shape. As they sat there, hand in hand, the world seemed to fall into place. The quiet of the town, the warmth of the sun, and the comfort of Jackson beside her, it was all they needed. They had each other, and together they were ready to face whatever came next.